Thousands of homes and buildings in Canterbury have been demolished following the earthquakes. Tonight on Street Stories, I'm sharing with you a number of hidden treasures found underneath some of these historic sites, starting here in New Regent Street. Named after Regent Street in London, this has always been a popular place for a lunchtime stroll in Christchurch. The pastel-coloured, Spanish-style Art Deco buildings stand out and are a topic of conversation for many people enjoying a coffee at one of the cafes along the street. It wasn't always this way. Until the middle of last year, the whole street was cordoned off inside the red zone. Broken buildings needed repairs and no one was allowed access. Once work finally started, these two moved in. By law, every building built prior to the 1900s has to be investigated by an archaeologist before it's demolished. Because the street is so historic, Nick and Patrick, two archaeologists from Opus International Consultants, had to cast an eye on the rebuild. At an undisclosed location on the other side of the city, they filled a storage unit with treasures dug up from all over the city, including New Regent Street.
This is a collection of rubbish, essentially household rubbish, that's been deliberately buried on a property. The date of it, well, that's what we're looking at in this material. This example here suggests it's 1880s, 1870s. So at some point in the 1870s, since there was no rubbish collection in the city, someone had to bury their rubbish in their property. They've buried this stuff. And it's great for us because we can come back and recover this material, this stuff that's been lying in the ground for over 130, 40 years.
These are only a few boxes of the bits and bobs they've rediscovered. The professional archaeologists seem almost like excited schoolboys as they take a closer look at what they've found.
Oh, this is a milk bottle. Milk or mustard? I've got no idea.
Whatever it is, it's more than 100 years old. The team came across it buried on a site somewhere in Christchurch. Now their job is to track the history of this bottle and thousands of other objects like it.
For us, it's a treasure trove of economic information. I'm sure it's what you would throw away, but you can compare it to what people throw away now in their rubbish. It's you get that same snapshot of what that household was like, and it's that social history, that individualness. This belongs to somebody that marks us out from historians, for instance, who might only look at newspaper accounts.
Essentially, Patrick and Nick spend their days dumpster diving. This is just rubbish, albeit hundreds of years old. Sometimes the duo don't even know what they've picked up until layers of dirt have been washed off.
There's a doll's head. That's a freaky-ass doll's head. It's still got lipstick on. That's crazy.
So how many of these have you actually had to clean over the last few years? Because it looks like there's quite a bit in here.
Usually hundreds per site, so it would be in the thousands over the course of, as the weeks progress and you work your way through the Christchurch suburbs and the CBD.
A lot of the objects they find are shattered into pieces. If years of decay didn't break the items, the diggers destroying the building certainly did. Nick and Patrick have had to painstakingly piece back together shards of history from thousands of items.
It's important to collate this information for our catalogue. The photograph is what we keep. The material will go back to the site or go to the museum, but the photographs will stay and forms that permanent record of what we've got.
Occasionally, though, they get a win. Last year, during the renovations at the earthquake-damaged New Regent Street, a teacup was discovered. Much to the archaeologists' surprise, it was completely intact.
We never find intact crockery. We'll find the handle, we'll find a bit of the rim, but to find an intact one attests to just how unmodified that area was. Now I know what they look like. So this is an 1880s teacup, quite a nice ornate one.
Before this was a street, the whole area was just one building. It was Christchurch's first roller skating rink called the Palace. It was a popular place when it opened in 1889 and a key focal point of the archaeologists' work.
It's been an interesting process. I think the most impressive thing is that we found archaeology. We thought there would be, but we didn't realise just how extensive the foundations of the original buildings were.
Buried under the street sat evidence of the rink. Archaeologists have even discovered a severely rusted skate.
This is pretty cool because it's not often you work on a site where you know what the building was, but to find tangible evidence that this was a roller skating rink. This is great for for just confirming what we read. It's not every day that you dig up a roller skate in general, but to know that this came from the roller skating rink, and that's amazing. It's slightly corroded, but it looks no different from skates of today.
Prior to 1889, the site was an empty block of land, but even then it was home to a circus. This photo details how the place looked. The skating rink owner went bankrupt after 3 years, and the site was turned into a boot factory. Nick found telltale remains of the business buried deep in the ground as construction workers dug up the street to work on the tram lines.
We have remains of the boot cuttings, rubber soles. So the boot factory was operating in the early 1890s, operated for about 8 or 9 years. And this stuff was just sitting on the surface under the current shop floors.
The street was then used as a picture theatre and another skating rink before it was demolished, and New Regent Street as we know it today was built in the 1930s. The foundations for the shops and the road were built on what was left behind, a pattern these archaeologists are finding all over the city. While CTV News was filming, the team made another discovery. Pieces of a long-forgotten cup buried deep in the ground underneath the original foundations.
Chances are it could have been some ceramic that a builder or someone involved with the construction of the place was sipping from or eating from, and then it broke and it was thrown over the shoulder. So you could argue we deal with other people's rubbish from the past, but it's fun.
For these two, work's not just about finding something old. It's a chance to map our past and rediscover what it was like to live in the early days of Christchurch.
It's critical we do. It's embarrassing that we've forgotten that we knew this stuff. I think it's a chance for us to honour that past whilst we rebuild a new city, to learn more about the city that was under the city that we had, to really understand what the history of this place was and what it was in relation to the whole country, let alone internationally even.
The archaeologists are learning lots, much of which has already been previously forgotten in time.
A chance to understand the social history more of that time period, a period that we thought we knew a little bit about but we don't actually know anything about. And that process, the anthropology, I guess, the social study is what we're doing.
Last week marked a year since New Regent Street reopened, and most of the buried treasure has been salvaged. Holes have been filled in, shops repainted, and the street looks almost brand new. Unfortunately, this normally isn't the case when archaeologists come exploring. By law, they need to investigate every building or structure built pre-1900 before it can be demolished. This has meant in many cases the archaeologists don't make a discovery unless the buildings are about to be torn down. Heritage advocate Ross Gray says it's not a good trade-off.
I think all things being equal, it would have been much to be preferred that there were either no heritage buildings lost or as few as possible, and unfortunately that is not the case with the rampant demolition stampede that we've seen over the last 2.5 years.
Ross Gray is an active heritage protester. He fought to save Cranmer Courts, he lost that battle. He's still hoping he'll be able to save the historic Majestic Theatre. He believes archaeological treasures can still be recovered, even if a building is repaired. As in the case of New Regent Street, all is not lost, even if the ground isn't completely ripped up.
You know, if you think about it, buildings could still give up their secrets, so to speak, without necessarily having to be totally demolished. They could, in the process of earthquake remediation, strengthening, reconstruction, and so on, opportunities would have been there, I think, for the much of the past of that particular building and its surroundings.
Ross works out of Shop 7 in Cathedral Junction, volunteering to promote the city's heritage buildings, many of which have been lost.
Clearly the Historic Places Trust archaeologists would have been in there digging away and finding out all sorts of things, which will be of immense benefit for the future generations in Christchurch, I'm sure.
As mentioned earlier, the Historic Places Trust needs to sign off on a building before it's demolished, and archaeologists have to document their findings during the demolition phase. Ross wishes that in some cases sign-off had never come, even if that meant missing out on some of these archaeological discoveries. But when a building is completely beyond repair, he supports any excavations. Coming up, With less than a year to go before the residential red zone is completely gone, archaeologists are quickly moving in on what's left.
It's a huge information gathering exercise for us, and it's going to give us a whole new picture of the history of, well, not just Christchurch, not just Canterbury, but certainly for New Zealand and the South Pacific, really, particularly as we get more of the prehistoric sites.
It's a ghost town in some Christchurch suburbs. More than 7,300 homes have been red zoned in Christchurch and the Waimakere area. Whole streets have been abandoned. Homeowners have packed up and left. Like the central city district before it, demolition crews have moved in with the aim of removing all buildings by the end of the year. Some of the homes being destroyed were built before 1900, so before the wrecking ball arrives, Nick and Patrick will need to pay a visit. Today, Nick has left the storage unit and made his way to Kaipoi as he gears up for an investigation. This home was red zoned a few years ago and has since been sold to the government. It looks modern on the outside with aluminium sliding doors and windows, but the earthquake damage reveals the truth.
And looking at the house now, I mean, we've been asked to try and provide an age for it, and the house has got some fairly modern fittings on it, but the basic form looks old. And we've come around the back here, and I think we've got the old chimney from the house, and as you can see in the crack in the stucco, those are handmade. Those are original bricks, 1860s, 1870s bricks. So that's an original feature. This portrays the real age of the house as certainly 19th century.
There's an argument that homes in a relatively good condition should be saved from the residential red zone and moved to new sites in an attempt to ease housing demands. But while this house looks decent from the road, behind the plaster, it's showing its age.
It's an interesting example of a house that otherwise is completely modern, but inside the internal framework are going to be the original 1860s, 70s, which matches the other houses in the street too. So an interesting example of something that looks modern, but in reality the inside of it is original and used to be in relatively good condition.
As the home is knocked down, Nick and Patrick will be back, dumpster diving under the rubble.
With much of these houses, people store their rubbish under the house or in the backyard. So we've got the house, there'll be the outhouses, the chicken coops, the rubbish pits in the back and in the section as well. So all the typical things you'd find with a domestic house.
As the demolition work ramps up, so too are the rebuilds of earthquake-damaged homes. Any historic homes that survived the earthquake will also need to be investigated.
So we're going to have a lot of good work to do all around the outlying suburbs. So it's a mixture of trying to track the historic settlements as well as the prehistoric stuff, which would be quite useful.
So why is this team bothering? What's interesting about all of these homes? With less than a year to go before all of them are gone, do they have enough time to complete the work?
We'll virtually cover all the ones that we need to cover, the ones that we have authorities for. It's a lot of information to gather. It's a huge information gathering exercise for us, and it's going to give us a whole new picture of the history of, well, not just Christchurch, not just Canterbury, but certainly for New Zealand and the South Pacific, really, particularly as we get more of the prehistoric sites.
Those prehistoric sites are what they're really hoping to find.
That's really exciting for us because whilst we know the prehistorics there and we've documented around the rest of the country, now we get a really good chance to get a clearer idea of how long Māori were here and what they were doing, and particularly the early Māori, the prehistoric, the Moa hunter period.
The bits of old homes, the brick, the bottles, the plates, it all helps to paint a picture of what life was like during the early days of Christchurch. This was a time when suburbs were first springing up, as the city started to expand.
We get the outlying suburbs, the little village settlements like New Brighton and such forth, sort of outline a city, so we'll get a different view. Same kind of material, and we'll make the same kind of conclusions about the economy and the lifestyles, but it will be interesting to see how those patterns change.
Kaipoi residents care about the information the team discover.
I would. I'd love to know what was under them. But I'd like to know what's under ours, but I really would, because it would be fascinating. It really and truly would.
It's intrinsic to our identity. That's why we care. It's part of our national identity. It's of international importance too. Particularly, I go back to the prehistoric. It's a Stone Age culture, and how many civilizations around the world are able to document the Stone Age component of their phase. Look, there's international focus on what we're doing here. It's of high academic importance. It's of high research importance. It's of high historical importance. But really, for us, it's our national identity. It's our local identity. Can't get patriarchal about these kind of things. What can we be?
New Zealand is a younger, developed country than most. Our history only goes back a few hundred years. But even so, the world's eyes are waiting to learn of our discoveries. Archaeologists around the globe are green with envy at the work these men are doing.
There's not many Western cities or communities that I guess have been so devastated by earthquake, and yet we have the opportunity to document through the rebuild process the underlying cities. You can imagine somewhere like London, where there is also a lot of archaeology, a lot of history. A similar kind of event would unearth a similar amount of archaeology. Certainly the pattern, the processes we put in on here are of great interest internationally.
So what should happen to the thousands of items recovered on different sites around the city?
There's talk of donating the collections to the universities or to other research centres. There's talk of reusing the material on sites as part of display or as part of the new designs that go through. Discussions have got to be had, but certainly Sarah, the government, has a lot of material that is of great importance as a collection.
Coming up, the team are getting their feet wet as they dredge 150 years of rubbish from the Avon River.
And we're documenting the river itself, the river bed dredging, gravel washing. It's given us an opportunity to recover artefacts that go all the way back to the 1850s, the initial settlement of Christchurch.
This is Watermark, the first stage of the Avon Precinct project. As detailed in the blueprint, once complete it will be one of New Zealand's largest urban restoration projects at a cost of $96 million and spanning 3.2 kilometres down the river. As work goes on, the Opus archaeologists are getting their feet wet. Their job's to dredge the river of any historic material.
So we have an opportunity here to document archaeology of a kind that we're not used to in New Zealand. We're documenting the river itself, the riverbed dredging, gravel washing. It's given us an opportunity to recover artefacts that go all the way back to the 1850s, the initial settlement of Christchurch.
The Avon River has turned out to be a gold mine of junk. The river's been a popular attraction for many years. These archaeologists have found dozens of long-forgotten items. They've filled bags with broken shards of cups and bottles, and there's no end to the kind of objects they're finding.
We've got a number of boxes, and this is a good sample of the kind of stuff that we're recovering from the river. A good collection of standard bottles, a nice wine bottle, some fizzy water. It's going to give us that whole idea of how life evolved over the past 100 years along the river. It's good archaeological material, and we have bags and bags of this stuff now.
What's interesting is that many of the materials they're salvaging are similar to what they're finding in the Waimakariri residential red zone.
To be finding domestic things, bricks, kitchen sinks, the kind of bottles and bits of plates that you'd normally find, it tells us a lot. And if we can put it into some kind of temporal context, some kind of date, then that's great. It's going to give us a snapshot of life along the river for the past 150 years.
In this small section of the river, they found more than 100 different types of ceramics. Each time they find something, they discover a new story.
It's a high-risk archaeological area, the river. Prehistoric settlement was focused along it, historic settlement as well. And what we're finding is that it's the domestic dwellings, it's the commercial businesses. There was a pub over here and doctor's surgery over here. It's that kind of archaeology that we're trying to capture. Some idea of who is living along the riverbank. There's less structures along the riverbanks. It's more just the rubbish and daily, everyday life of those who live along it that we're trying to find.
It isn't just bottles and crockery they're fishing out of the water. They found all sorts, including a broken, rusty bicycle.
We found everything on this job. We've even found the kitchen sink. I think what the kitchen sink tells us is a good example of the kind of material that is getting thrown in the river as rubbish. It's clearly from a house along the side here, just been disposed of. It's a good example of the material that we are getting. It's a representation of the social history along the riverbanks.
All of these objects come from the thousands of people who've strolled around the river over the last few decades. The archaeological team are excited to keep working down the river as the clean-up project continues.
We know that once we get to Victoria Square, there's a number of early buildings, remains of which might still be there, including the first jail, an immigration barracks and other things. So we've got some structures to look out for, but it would be interesting to see how the types of objects change as we move down the river, as we go past various pubs and hotels.
We caught up with Nick and Patrick a few months after this investigation finished. Inside their storage unit, they were struggling to find room for some of the objects they've found.
We got the usual finds. We've got boxes here of bits of old bottles, coffee cup, glassware, as you would expect. But again, this stuff is pre-1900. Some of this is 1860s. We found some 1850 stuff. The oddest thing we found, other than the bits of toilet bowl rim, I think we found a kitchen sink even, were the parts of a traction engine, an old tractor. Steam traction engines were around in the late 1890s, early 1900s. There's a photograph of one in the library, but we actually recovered bits of one in the river gravels in the stream. So we couldn't see these looking at the stream, but once we dug in, there's part of an engine housing here and some of the cogs. And over here, a boiler tank, which we presume is from the same engine. So there's parts of a steam engine buried in the river. I don't know how they got there. I don't know why they're buried there. Whether the tractor drove in and got stuck and they just left it to rot. But that's pretty weird. But that's what it is.
We know the archaeologists are passionate about their work, but what do everyday Cantabrians think of their findings? Thousands of items have been recovered, but is it all worthwhile? The views on the street are mixed. Some say these boxes are just wasting space.
No, I think just for it's pretty much what they find is pots and pans and old fireplaces. So yeah, we've got a museum already. It's got enough pieces of history in there.
Even the discovery of this historic steam engine in the Avon River couldn't convince Nigel to save the material.
It's probably there for a reason, isn't it? It's rubbish. So yeah, no, that one would probably come out of the river by all means. But yeah, no, I think just take it to the scrapyard and move on to something else.
When asked about the archaeological work, one woman was worried about whether it would hold up the rebuild.
Probably the developers wouldn't be very happy about it.
Major property owner Anthony Goff sure wasn't impressed when archaeologists uncovered this historic boulder on the site of his new development. Shan's Emporium once sat on the site. It's been moved a block back, but the remains of the heritage building's chimney have had to be dug up and examined. It's proven to be a headache for the rich lister. Archaeological investigations have been holding up the work and costing him time and money.
Hey, we've had archaeologists scraping the soil around here, and what do they find? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. But we've spent $70,000 with them, and there seems no limit. They just keep wanting to turn up where you found a lump of concrete that was under a pile of bricks, and they say, oh, we want to look at that. And we say, well, come and tell us, do you want it, or do we send it to tip? A lot of frustrations like that.
But while not everyone is impressed, many of the people I spoke to were.
Yeah, I reckon it is important, especially if, like, for Christchurch with our history and what we've been through with the earthquakes and that.
If that's something that's of interest to you, good, go for it. If you're not, well, it's not doing any harm in doing the investigation. You know, once it's gone, you've lost it forever.
You never know what they'll find. If they don't do it now, then it'll take another 20, 30 years. I mean, we're always, when we dismantle things and opening up any old buildings, we always find, you know, the old casks of stuff that guys have put aside for us to find. So, yeah, we've found papers and all sorts of stuff just inside walls and stuff. So
all that information should be available, and somebody has to collect it, don't they? I mean, at the end of the day, and verify it. And if they're going to teach it in schools, it should be factual. So, therefore, they've got to dig, don't they? And they've got to do what they could do.
As you've seen, buildings may have been lost, but a consolation prize is the heritage that's been uncovered. Christchurch is gaining a fuller picture of life in the city and the wider suburbs since people first settled here. And that's this week's Street Stories.